song that you just listened to is called Without a Song. It was a song that came out of the 911 experience. And to explain the experience and the way of it and how it was felt and how it was originated, you, our Keys listening audience, get to talk directly to legendary jazz great, immortal in jazz, Sonny Rollins. Mr. Rollins, welcome to the program.
Welcome to you. Very kind of you.
I'm here with Jenny Trejo, and she insisted that I not do this interview with you without her being present.
Okay.
It's a great honor to be on with you, Mr. Rollins.
In fact, she says that her whole household, her sons play saxophone because of you.
Well, that's great. There's no better avocation than playing the saxophone and being into music for a young man, and it's a great thing.
The thing that's always amazed me about music is the ability of the musician. In fact, let me put it like this. I had a niece who went to the Philadelphia High School for the Performing Arts. And she played the violin all through elementary school, middle school, and high school. And when I asked her what she was going to do with it, she says, I don't want to work hard enough, she says, to make it sing. In other words, she could do the mechanics, she could read the music, it sounded great, but to really make it sing, meaning she had to take it to another level, which put a lot of effort in. Your saxophone takes on a life of its own. They talk about music soothes the savage beach. The emotion and things that you're able to do with your sax means you took it to a place where it has a life of its own. And was that your goal when you first started?
Yeah, that was my goal. I was lucky. I was born into a musical family. And the moment I heard jazz music as a very small kid, I knew that I wanted to I knew I loved music. And a little later on, I began listening to certain people, and I said, yeah, well, this is what I want to do. I want to be a jazz musician, you know. So I loved it. I loved practicing, and, you know, my mother would have to call me for dinner. I'd be blowing my horn just all night long if possible. And it's sort of just, you know, it was something that I was fortunate that it was the spirit of music sort of.
And when you say, Mr. Rollins, when you say all night long, that was in your home?
Well, no, I misspoke. What I mean to say is that I played all day long at my home.
Okay.
You know, when my mother had to call me for dinner and all that stuff. But all night long, no, I wasn't able to do that as a kid. But later on, of course, when I got older, then I played all night long. But when I was at home, no, I just played all day. And, you know, it was like that.
You grew up around the corner from the Savoy in Harlem. That must have been a great influence to you.
Yeah, I grew up close to the Savoy, and I used to walk past the Savoy when I was going back and forth to school. And we used to see the pictures of all the musicians, you know, that were at the Savoy and at the Cotton Club, which is right near there, and some of the other places, you know.
As a kid, were you? Is that a place that they really didn't want you to go around or go near?
Well, the Cotton Club, of course, I was way too young for that. The Savoy, I was too young for that, although when I became a teenager, I began going to the Savoy. I was able to get into Savoy. We used to call it the track because it was really like shaped like a racetrack in a way.
Okay, all right.
And I eventually got to go up to the Savoy and see some bands in there.
And you used to play the piano first. I mean, that goes back to the day. Did you have to actually sit there and take lessons at the piano?
Well, I was lucky because I was the youngest child in my family, and my mother let me get away with a lot of stuff, you know. So they tried to get me to sit down and take piano lessons, but you know, I wanted to go out and play ball and all that, so they let me get away with that. So I really didn't get my my grounding like my older siblings did.
Okay, and are they still in music? Did they get into jazz with some of their musical training? Or are you the only one that really got into full-time music?
I got into full-time music. My brother was really good. He played like classical violin, and he was really good, but he gravitated into another profession. And my sister sang in church and played piano and all of that, but you know, she didn't. She went into having a family and all of that stuff, you know. And so I was the only one that ended up really becoming a musician.
And you ended up being mentored by some of the people that became legends within the jazz community. You were mentored by Coleman Hawkins, and you got to hang out with Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis and people of that caliber. That to us, you know, as people that follow jazz, is just an amazing thing. And the opportunities that were afforded you by
and is that because where you lived, or was the jazz musicians then that prolific then?
Well, the family moved up to an area of Harlem where a lot of the prominent jazz people and people in the community, a lot of big people like Thurgood Marshall and W.E.B. Du Bois, they all lived up on what we call Sugar Hill in Harlem. That was sort of the elite section. So we finally moved up there, but the reason I got next to people like Coleman and Thelonious Monk and older musicians who were my idols, they heard that there's a young guy playing saxophone, and he's good, and listen to him. So they were all looking to get young people in their bands and so on. Just as people are today, we all need an infusion of youngsters coming up.
And you pay them a little bit less, too, if they're young. Am I right?
Well, in those days, we didn't think too much about money. I mean, I didn't think nothing about money. It was all about the music, and it was all about trying to learn the music. And in fact, in those days, the aspirations of jazz musicians weren't that high because, sure, there were famous people like Duke Ellington and Count Basie and so, but, just being able to play and be in that company was enough for most of us. So we didn't think in terms of, well, gee, how much money am I going to get? It wasn't about that. These days, it's much more about money, and
so what you sound like you're telling me is you guys were all musicians, and in your culture, in your genre, in your circle, you guys were just playing for each other. It's like football players that said in the old day of the NFL, "Hey, I would have played if they didn't pay me nothing."
Right. Exactly.
And so when we look at these giants, then Miles and Charlie Parker and Lester Young, Bud Powell, Dizzy, Kenny Dorman, these guys were just regular guys, but they was musicians.
There happened to be very blessed people that had this great talent, and they would probably do that regardless of how much money they made.
Yeah.
And as we know, there's some very great people that didn't make much money at all. People like Scott Joplin, a lot of guys ended up broke. Even a lot of famous musicians, some of whom you just mentioned, ended up really with not a lot of economic capabilities at the end of their lives. And, it was kind of sad. But it wasn't about money to them. It was about the music. And that's how I am today. I inherited that feeling. So to me, money is the last thing. And naturally, I want bread on the table and all this stuff, being able to live someplace. But other than that, it's about the music. It's not about
Right.
trying to be have
And
5
just
cars in the garage and all that
I
stuff.
hear you. And just before I turn it over to Jenny to ask you another question and to have a conversation with you, the Sugar Hill section, like you said, was elite. W.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall. In order to live there, your parents were professional. They were highly educated. How were they able to? I mean, because we don't know much about your roots.
Right.
And about your parents, your mom and your dad, to be able to move you to that section of Harlem.
Well, in a way, that would be true because the real estate up there was very upscale real estate, but everybody that lived on Sugar Hill was not necessarily well-to-do. I mean, there were lesser value houses up there, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't that everybody up there was automatically making a lot of money.
I got you. It was a community in itself, a better community, but it did have a mixture because usually in segregation and all that everybody, whether they were artisans or professionals or just laborers, they were assigned to a certain section.
Right. Yeah, but this was a section of black professionals, but there were other people of lesser economic means.
Hey, Thurgood Marshall and them didn't have any money back then in them days. They were just starting out too as young attorneys and all.
They were starting out. They were a little bit ahead, I would say, insofar as the economic thing. There were a lot of, and there were Duke Ellington, a lot of really top black artists and professionals lived on Sugar Hill. So there were black people up there that had means, But there were also, as I said, it was a community. If you could move up there and get to pay the rent, you might not be living in a big house like W.B. Du Bois, but you were in the neighborhood.
Yes.
So it was good. I used to see W.B. Du Bois every day walking to his house, while I was out there playing ball on the street,
Uh-huh.
And so it was good. It was a good sight to see some of these people actually,
Yeah, that weren't far removed from the community. Jenny?
I've got some questions that my son Oscar had for you. He had given an eye tooth to be here with us, but he's holding down a classroom over in Austin, Texas. He's a band director, like I told you, thanks to your influence. And one of the questions that he had was, jazz came out of the juke joints and the clubs, and you guys were you were a pioneer in developing jazz. And he would like to know, and I would like to know what you think of what jazz has become now that it's a standard staple of public education and of the entire world. No matter where you go in the world, you've got jazz.
Well, I commend your, you said it's your son or your
son.
Yeah, right. It's wonderful that he's getting involved in jazz. Well, it's a wonderful thing for me to see jazz being appreciated, especially here in America. It was always appreciated in Europe and other parts of
Correct.
the world, and it was least appreciated in America. So through a lot of social movements that were taking place during the 40s, 50s, and 60s, jazz was able to get some respectability and credibility and move into the universities and so on. That's really something that I wouldn't have dreamed would have happened back in the 50s when jazz had such a low...
on the scale of popularity and all like that, because it was like an exclusive kind of thing for a certain type of people. That's
true. Jazz has always been a little bit elite in the type of music it is. It's very elemental, it's very down to earth, but it also has an intellectual quality to it.
Oh, yes.
It sure does. I always say that jazz is the calculus of music. It's tough to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy listening, but it's not easy. It's you have to. I mean, that's why you have easy listening jazz today. You've got
right, soft jazz. They call it.
Soft jazz, right. But the nucleus of jazz is really the very sophisticated ways that people like Art Tatum and Charlie Parker and a lot of the people, Coltrane and Miles and Bud Powell. I mean, those people were playing very intellectual, highly intelligent music, and the world recognized it, and finally America recognized it too.
Well, we're going to talk about the specific type of jazz that you pioneered. You took it to another level called improvisational jazz. And we're going to talk about what that means and what it is when we come right back. We're talking about legendary jazz great Sonny Rollins, his 911 concert album entitled Without a Song. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. and the rest I'll do live on the air. But I want to go into that. Improvisational jazz is different. Remember you just talked, sir, about the soft jazz and all that stuff?
Right.
Improvisational jazz was always there, but it wasn't recognized as an art form. Did that come out of the nightclubs that you used to go to after hours, after everything closes, and you guys would challenge each other and all?
Yeah, well, that was basically called a jam session. And that was the place where a lot of musicians would get up and challenge each other, and so on and so forth, and see who could, cut. We would call it cut the other guy. It was a good learning school, and a lot of things came out of that. I mean, some of them were exhibitionists in a sense, because it's not just about pleasing the people. People might get real excited about something that's not really that deep musically. So you have to be careful in a jam session. It's there's some guys that might be able to play something that gets right to the visceral core of a lot of people, and everybody might, oh wow, and there's maybe another guy that's playing a lot more deep music that's not easily
and it goes over their head. That's right.
Exactly. So the jam session could be sometimes not the best place to say, well, this guy came out of the jam session and he's good, because you have to face the people liking people for certain reasons.
Well, then what do you think about the fact that they've labeled you as a great jazz improvisational player? What do you think about that title?
Yeah, well, a guy wrote an article about me some years ago, and he examined one of the songs that I had played, and this guy went through this guy was a music professor, by the way. So he went through a whole big article about all the different things that I was doing, and this and that, and technical things and everything. So people accepted that article. Now, when I read that article, I said, well, wait a minute, what is this? Is this what I'm doing? I never knew what I was doing, because I was just doing it. It just, something came to me when I played. That's just natural to me. So, it's something which it's very natural to me, and it's just the way I play. I mean, I try to tell a story, and that was part of what we learned growing up, that when you're playing, you have to tell a story. You have to say something.
Well, what they said was that album in 1957, Blues 7,
right?
They said that set a new standard for improvised music. And by the way, before you talk about Blues 7, let me tell you this. The most comprehensive bio that I found on you on the Internet was from a Russian site.
Okay. Yeah, well, that shows jazz has no country boundaries.
That's right, and half of it is written in Russian, by the way.
Okay, well, that's great.
But it's very comprehensive. But this Blues 7, why did they call that a new standard for improvised music? Do you know why they did that? I know you had what was Horace Silver and Thelonious Monk and all them on that album?
No, actually on that album, Blues 7, I had the great Max Roach on drums. And I had a fellow named Tommy Flanagan, another great pianist out of Detroit. and I had a bass player out of Detroit named Doug Watkins. So I just had a quartet on that. But that solo on Blue Seven of that song, I guess, I guess it exemplified the logical, having a solo which makes sense and which, like I was saying, it asks a question, it answers a question, it discusses, it resolves. I mean, I guess that's what they mean. It just exemplified a solo with logic. That's about the only way that I can
solo
explain
with
it.
logic. That's why and then Jenny just called that jazz is the what?
The calculus.
The calculus of music. That's why and then Jenny just called that jazz is the what?
The calculus.
The calculus of music.
It's hard to do, Mr. Rollins. You're being studied at the universities. You're being studied as a part of the theory classes. It seems like I read that you were self-taught, and maybe you didn't know all the rules, and so maybe you didn't know you were stretching them and bending them and remaking them because you fall straight within a lot of what the music theory is, and the toughest assignment that my son Oscar said he ever got was to take and write down every note that you did as a part of Tenor Madness. They gave him a section of Tenor Madness, and they told him, don't use a computer, just use your ears and see if you can figure what Sonny Rollins did. And and that's another question that he had for you that I'd like to ask you is, you were mentored by some of the greats within jazz, and now you are mentoring millions and millions. Your music is going forward and mentoring millions of jazz musicians. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel very humbled about it because I am a spiritual person who believes that whatever I have is owed to my maker, my creator, and so if I'm able to pass on something which was a gift to me, I studied music, I practiced all that, but I didn't really. A lot of guys studied and practiced, but they weren't given the particular talent, maybe that I had. So it comes from another place, and if I can give it to somebody else or inspire somebody else, then I think that I'm creating a little bit of good vibrations for me when I have to meet my creator,
But on the other side, sir, it's like Michael Jordan. I mean, they talk about the skills, how he elevated it, but he practiced all the time.
Right.
I mean, he didn't just take that natural gift that God had given him, and that's all it was about, and he didn't show up. He was the first to get to practice. He was the last guy to leave. And he honed it, and he took responsibility for it.
Right.
And I think by doing it, I from what I've gathered from your volumes of work, you did the same thing, which led to your frustration. Everybody talks about reaching the apex of modern jazz, how you felt frustrated and you withdrew from public view in August 1959 and stayed out of view for a couple of years. Which meant during that time you went and practiced your horn while walking the Williamsburg Bridge. Can you wasn't that a frustration, that thing that was in your mind and in your heart, you couldn't get through the horn?
Right, exactly. And that was exacerbated by the fact that a lot of people were beginning to notice me and give me a lot of credit and a lot of acclaim and everything, and I really wanted to make sure that I was taking care of business because I don't want to be somebody that doesn't deliver. If you pay for something, you want to get your value. So I wanted to be able to live up to all of the claim I was getting from the jazz community. So I went back and cut out and said, okay, I'm going to go back in the woodshed, as we say. And I practiced on the Williamsburg Bridge and got myself a little closer to where I want to be. And then I came back. So, yes, you have to practice. You have to use what gift you have. You do have to practice, but